Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to step into the silent boots of a man who spoke less than he killed. And that's saying something. It's the early 1930s in Spain, and the monarchy is coughing its last breath like a broken accordion. Crowds are rioting in Madrid, newspapers are catching fire in cafes, and someone somewhere is always shouting about the soul of the nation. But tucked quietly in a corner office at the War Ministry is a man with a tight jaw, a bad mustache, and the personality of an old filing cabinet. His name is Franco. And no, he's not interesting yet. You might not survive this story if you believe dictators are born with loud voices and waving fists. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Are you watching this in New York at 3 a.m.? Or somewhere weirder? Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get this story started tonight. Franco was born in 1892 in the rugged port city of Ferrol in Galicia, Spain, a place that smells like saltwater, iron, and frustration. His father was a flamboyant naval officer with too much liquor in his blood and too little patience for family life. His mother, on the other hand, was deeply Catholic and tightly wound, like a rosary coiled around a fist. Historians still debate whether Franco's lifelong stoicism was a rebellion against his father or just pure lack of charisma. By the time he turned 17, Franco had enrolled in Spain's infantry academy in Toledo, where he quickly established himself as efficient. Not inspiring, not brave, certainly not poetic. Just efficient, like a fax machine in a war zone. While other cadets drank and chased girls, Franco polished his boots and memorized logistics manuals. Fun, right? But Spain didn't have time for fun. The country was disintegrating, economically, politically, spiritually. After a failed flirtation with constitutional monarchy, King Alfonso XIII went into voluntary exile in 1931, leaving behind a mess the size of a collapsed wedding cake. Enter the Second Spanish Republic, a bold experiment in democracy, equality, and trying to cram 800 years of unresolved Catholic guilt into a single parliament. Spoiler, it didn't go well. Franco, meanwhile, kept climbing the ranks. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel at just 33, the youngest in Europe at the time. It helped that Spain's military was obsessed with colonial wars and had a very unhealthy turnover rate. Soldiers tended to either die or quit. Franco, however, did neither. He just kept showing up. Now here's something weird. Despite his conservative beliefs and almost allergic reaction to democracy, Franco didn't initially oppose the Republic. He actually served it faithfully, even suppressing leftist uprisings on its behalf. Historians still debate whether this was tactical opportunism or just his deep love of following orders. Either way, it's unsettling. But Franco didn't make waves. While generals barked and politicians screamed on the radio, he just waited, listened, calculated. And yes, the man blinked less than a statue. There's a military photo of him from 1932 where he looks like he's already planning your funeral, while calmly drinking lukewarm coffee. Here's a strange fact. Franco was obsessed with maps. Not in a normal way. He collected them like baseball cards and would spend hours poring over terrain as if it held the secrets of the human soul. His aide once joked that Franco probably knew the shape of Morocco's rivers better than his own wife's face. Probably true. Back in Madrid, things were falling apart again. The Republic's new government, a jumble of liberals, anarchists, and intellectuals, started dismantling the privileges of the military and the church. That did not go over well. Army officers grumbled, priests scowled, peasants started waving red flags. Spain was becoming a chessboard where everyone wanted to play king. And through it all, Franco kept his voice low, his uniform pressed, and his loyalties deliberately unclear. Because when a nation starts to crumble, the loud ones fall first. It's always the quiet ones, measuring the angles, memorizing the maps, who rise. In 1920s Morocco, the heat isn't the kind that fades. It wraps around your neck like a burning scarf and stays there. The air smells like blood and rust, and the sand gets into places you didn't even know you had. It's here, in this parched corner of Spain's colonial holdings, that Franco earned his first real reputation, and it wasn't pretty. They called him the Butcher of the Rif. Not to his face, of course. To his face, they called him Comandante, Franco had been stationed in North Africa since his early 20s. And if Spain was a crumbling old house, then Morocco was the backyard shed where forgotten officers went to make a name or die trying. Franco thrived there. He found something in the Rif Mountains that he couldn't find in Madrid: clarity. The war against the Berber rebels, particularly under the legendary Abd el-Krim, was savage and deeply unpopular back home. But it was also a breeding ground for future generals. Franco quickly rose through the ranks after surviving a near-fatal wound in 1916, an injury that tore through his abdomen and almost killed him. Most men would have taken that as a sign. Franco took it as an omen. Here's your historical fact. He became the youngest general in modern Europe in 1926, at the age of 33. His success came not just from battlefield grit, but from his obsessive attention to hierarchy. He ran his units like clockwork. Brutal clockwork. But what really launched his public image was Spain's strange fascination with colonial theater. Newspapers back in Madrid were full of breathless dispatches about young Franco, the calm killer, the mystical Christian soldier, the savior of Spain's honor. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was mythologized into a kind of militarized monk. You could even buy cigarette cards with his face on them. Weird fact: Franco was a literal pinup for conservative housewives in the 1930s. Think of it as the original Dictator thirst trap, minus the Instagram filter. And while the newspapers fell in love, the elites took note. In a time when Spain's political elite couldn't agree on lunch, they could agree on one thing: this Franco fellow had potential. He was ruthless but not loud, devout but not sentimental, a safe pair of hands for the old order. Historians still debate whether Franco's image was self-constructed or manufactured by monarchist propaganda. Either way, it worked. He became the face of stability, which in Spain usually meant someone who will shoot the right people. But Morocco changed more than just his resume. It shaped his soul. The Berber rebellion was guerrilla warfare at its worst: ambushes, torture, scorched earth. And Franco absorbed all of it like chalk soaking up blood. He became obsessed with discipline, silence, and fear. He once had a soldier executed for swearing in front of a priest. Another was demoted for failing to salute fast enough. This wasn't a man who tolerated cracks in the armor. There's something disturbingly bureaucratic about Franco's brutality. He didn't scream. He didn't pound tables. He simply circled names, signed orders, and watched the machine grind forward. No poetry, no fireworks, just death, properly alphabetized. Back in Spain, the monarchy was dead, the republic was shaky, and political violence had become dinner table conversation. Anarchists were throwing bombs, fascists were holding rallies, and socialists were arming up. Franco, now based in Madrid and head of the elite General Military Academy, was quietly becoming the establishment's last hope. They needed a man who could keep the officers in line and, if necessary, erase a few heads off the chessboard. But Franco never rushed. He sat through cabinet meetings like a gargoyle in uniform. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He rarely blinked. And still, the myths kept building. Newspapers praised his steel nerves, his devout Catholic morals, and his heroic calm. Some said he had the soul of a saint. Others said he had no soul at all. And in the streets, the posters went up: Franco the savior, Franco the shield, Franco the future. No one really knew what he believed, but that was part of the appeal. Because when your country is on fire, even a bucket of sand can look like salvation. It started, as most disasters do, with men in smoky rooms overestimating their own timing. In July of 1936, a ragged collection of right-wing generals launched a coup against the Second Republic. It was meant to be quick, 2 or 3 days, tops. Clean sweep, glory restored, Spain saved. But Spain, being Spain, refused to follow the script. Within a week, the coup had unraveled into a full-blown civil war. And guess who suddenly found himself in the middle of it? That's right, our favorite granite-faced general with the spine of a bayonet, Francisco Franco. At the time of the coup, Franco wasn't even in Spain proper. He was stationed in the Canary Islands, exiled politely by a republic that didn't know what else to do with him. Out of sight, out of mutiny. At least that was the plan. But Franco had friends in high places and telegrams in hidden code. Within hours of the rebellion's start, he'd secretly accepted the invitation to join the conspiracy. He sent a simple message to his fellow officers. Glory to death. Historical fact. Franco's wife, Carmen Polo, personally burned his coded messages in the hotel fireplace to keep them out of Republican hands. Love language, 1930s edition. Here's the funny part. Franco wasn't even supposed to be the leader. The original plan had General San Giorgio in charge. But San Giorgio, God bless his grandiosity, died in a plane crash while flying back to Spain. Why? Because he insisted on packing too many suits for his triumphant return and overloaded the aircraft. Yes, really. He died because of excessive fashion. Historians still debate whether Franco delayed his own return to ensure San Giorgio's fatal detour. Was it luck, calculation, or just Spain's national talent for self-sabotage? We'll never know. What we do know is that Franco now had an opening. But there was still one enormous problem. His army was 1,200 miles away. The elite Spanish Foreign Legion and Moroccan colonial troops, his most loyal forces, were trapped in North Africa, cut off from mainland Spain. No ships, no planes, no way across the sea. Coup over, right? Wrong. Enter the Nazis. Franco, with a little help from his monarchist friends, sent desperate pleas to Berlin and Rome. Hitler responded with a cold grin and the gift of history's first major military airlift. German Junkers aircraft flew thousands of Franco's African troops into southern Spain. Mussolini, never one to miss a chance to cosplay Caesar, sent weapons and supplies. And just like that, the game changed. The first shock of the Civil War was how fast things split. Cities like Madrid and Barcelona stayed loyal to the Republic. Rural areas and conservative strongholds rallied to Franco and the nationalists. Spain became a shattered mirror, each piece sharp, reflecting a different version of patriotism. Franco's early moves were slow, deliberate, and dull, just the way he liked them. While flashier generals made big speeches and big mistakes, he consolidated power in the background. His African troops, hardened in colonial warfare, swept through Andalusia like a sandstorm with rifles. Discipline. Fear. Obedience. No room for poetry. There's a chilling irony in how Franco's colonial experience was now being used against his own people. The same tactics he'd once used on Moroccan rebels, mass arrests, summary executions, psychological warfare, were now turned inward. Villages that resisted were cleansed. Suspected leftists were lined up and shot at dawn. Names vanished from phone books. And always, Franco remained silent. Weird fact, Franco carried a small, ivory Madonna statue in his breast pocket during battle. He believed it would keep him bulletproof. As the nationalists began to gain ground, Franco's rivals started dropping, some politically, some permanently. Generals who disagreed with his methods mysteriously lost their fronts, or, in some cases, their lives. By late September 1936, Franco had muscled his way to the top. He was named Generalissimo and head of state by a nationalist junta, a title that smelled more like Caesar than soldier. But don't mistake this for triumph. This wasn't glory, it was gravity. The war had become a black hole, pulling the country in. Franco wasn't waving flags or inspiring crowds. He was tightening bolts, closing exits, eliminating doubt. Spain was no longer choosing sides. Spain was choosing who to fear more. And in the ruins of a failed coup, Francisco Franco became inevitable. By early 1937, Spain wasn't just bleeding. It was evaporating. Cities were turning into battlegrounds, churches into armories, and families into opposing militias. The Spanish Civil War wasn't two armies clashing. It was 20 ideologies in a trench coat punching each other in the dark. But somewhere in that chaos stood one man who wasn't improvising. Franco. He moved like a glacier with a rifle, slow, relentless, unbothered by drama. While Republican forces argued over which flavor of socialism tasted best, Franco was busy eliminating variables. His first step? Silence his fellow nationalist generals. It sounds like a plot twist, but really, it was just math. Franco knew power in Spain didn't go to the loudest. It went to the last man standing. In early 1937, he absorbed the Carlists, monarchists, Phalangists, and other right-wing factions into a single political movement under his thumb. Officially, it was the unification of Spain's patriotic forces. Unofficially, it was a purge disguised as paperwork. Historical fact, in April 1937, Franco created the Falange Española Tradicionalista, a fusion of competing fascist and monarchist groups, all under his command. The party had one ideology: obedience. The rest was optional. Of course, not everyone got the memo. José Antonio Primo de Rivera, the founder of the Falange, was executed by Republican forces early in the war, but even from the grave, he threatened Franco's spotlight. So Franco did what any good dictator in progress does. He elevated José Antonio into a martyr, a symbol, a face for the new Spain. Then he buried him under a mountain. Literally. Franco began building a grand mausoleum, Valle de los Caídos, the Valley of the Fallen. Think, fascist Disneyland, but with more corpses and Gregorian chants. It wasn't finished until decades later, but even in 1937, Franco was already envisioning a legacy carved in stone. Weird fact? Franco designed part of the memorial to align with the sun during solstices. The man wanted God's lighting on his grave. But while he crafted myths, he also waged war. His strategies weren't brilliant. They were methodical. Town by town, road by road. His army didn't blitz. It surrounded, strangled, and moved on. In April 1937, the small Basque town of Guernica became a grim legend when German and Italian planes, supporting Franco, bombed it into ash. Civilians died by the hundreds. Franco denied involvement, of course. He blamed the Republicans, said the town blew itself up, which is a choice. Historians still debate whether Franco specifically ordered the bombing or just approved the target list with a shrug and a cigar. What's clear is that Guernica worked. The Basque resistance cracked and the world shuddered. And that's the thing. Franco wasn't flashy, but he didn't need to be. While Hitler posed and Mussolini preened, Franco just persisted. He met with diplomats like a bored school principal. He rarely smiled. His voice was dry gravel. And still, more cities fell. By the end of 1938, the Republican zones were collapsing under their own contradictions. Stalin-backed communists were purging anarchists. International volunteers were disillusioned or dead. The Republic was becoming a house with no doors. Franco kept pushing. Not because he was in a rush, but because he never stopped. He rejected offers of compromise, he refused mediation. The war would end, he said, only when the Reds were exterminated. No negotiations, no shared power. Just one Spain, under one hand. His men wore rosaries with their bullets. Priests rode tanks. Propaganda films showed him as a knight chosen by God, Spain's redeemer, rising from the smoke. And yet, the man himself? Still the same silent calculator. Still sleeping just 4 hours a night. Still reading battlefield reports over dry bread and cold coffee. Still carrying that little Madonna in his coat, like a celestial badge of approval. By early 1939, Franco controlled almost all of Spain. He hadn't just won the war, he had drained it. Slowly, surgically, like poison from a vein. And the strangest part? There had never been a speech. No sweeping declarations, no visionary manifestos, just a shrug, a signature, and the growing weight of silence. Because sometimes victory doesn't roar. Sometimes it just doesn't blink. Madrid fell on March 28, 1939. The Republican government, splintered and exhausted, fled into exile. Resistance evaporated like fog under floodlights. Spain at last was quiet, and not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of quiet where even birds seemed too scared to sing. Francisco Franco, unbothered, unflinching, and utterly unchanged, walked out of the wreckage not just as a general, but as absolute ruler. He didn't call himself a dictator. No. He was the caudillo de España por la gracia de Dios, the leader of Spain by the grace of God. Modesty clearly wasn't the house style. Historical fact, Franco assumed control of Spain as both head of state and commander-in-chief, effectively eliminating any distinction between government and military. His word became law, and law became silence. There was no coronation, no parade, just paperwork, reshuffling, and the quiet folding of 1,000 flags. One Spain, one face, one voice. And the first thing Franco did with his newfound power? He cleaned. Not metaphorically, literally. His regime began a mass purge of anyone associated with the Republic. Tens of thousands were arrested, many executed, and more simply disappeared. Weird fact, Franco's government classified unborn children of leftists as future threats to the regime. Hospitals were ordered to reassign them at birth, an entire generation of infants stolen and renamed. Historians still debate whether Franco believed his own myth or just knew how to weaponize it. Did he see himself as savior or survivor? Visionary or vacuum? The answer, like most things with Franco, never quite arrives. He was a master of the blank page. While other strongmen roared, he remained a whisper behind a locked door. But make no mistake, he was always listening. Internationally, Spain became an outlier. Hitler had backed him. Mussolini had funded him. But Franco was no one's puppet. In fact, just months after seizing power, he began sidestepping both. When World War II erupted, Franco declared Spain non-belligerent, a diplomatic term that meant, I'm watching, I'm armed, and I'm not getting involved unless I really have to. Privately, he admired Hitler's energy and Mussolini's aesthetics, but he didn't trust them. And frankly, they didn't trust him either. Franco sent troops, the Blue Division, to fight alongside the Germans on the Eastern Front, but refused to drag Spain into a full alliance. A running joke in diplomatic circles was that Franco played poker without touching the chips. No risk. All leverage. Meanwhile, back home, Spain turned gray. Not metaphorically, literally. Franco's regime banned colorful clothing, jazz music, foreign literature, and anything that didn't fit the mold of national Catholicism. Women were sent home. Men were sent to church. The country shrank inward like a salted slug. But beneath the ashes of ideology, Franco built something unexpected: stability. The trains ran. The streets were quiet. The chaos was gone. If you kept your mouth shut and your curtains closed, you might even forget there had been a war. That was the real genius of Franco's dictatorship. Not the brutality, but the boredom. Weird, isn't it? That a man who came to power through blood and fire maintained it through routine. By the early 1940s, Franco was no longer just a general or even just a ruler. He was a kind of furniture, permanent, heavy, and impossible to move. Spain bent around him like heat-distorted glass. And still, no great speeches. No sweeping movements, just the hum of bureaucrats, the scrape of church pews, the tick of clocks, all wound by the same quiet hand. The man who had once stormed deserts, crossed oceans, and hijacked a civil war was now simply there. And Spain, broken and stitched together with threadbare myths, simply adjusted to his shadow. So what do we make of Francisco Franco, this strange, silent figure who dragged a fractured Spain into his iron quiet? Was he a genius of power or just the last man standing after everyone else shot each other? Maybe both. He didn't have the theatrical madness of Hitler or the operatic failures of Mussolini. He wasn't flamboyant, inspiring, or even particularly charming. But that's what made him dangerous. Because Franco didn't need the spotlight. He needed the levers behind the curtain. He was the kind of man who could sit in a silent office for hours and still leave you terrified of what might happen next. He understood that power isn't always taken with a gun. It's taken with a form, a title, a shrug. While others waved flags, Franco filed people into categories. And Spain? Spain got used to it. That's the quiet horror of his legacy. He didn't burn the house down. He turned off the lights and told everyone to stay seated. He would rule for 36 years, longer than Hitler, longer than Mussolini, longer than Stalin. And when he finally died in 1975, there was no uprising. Just silence, because by then, silence had become the national anthem. So remember, not all dictators scream. Some whisper, and sometimes that's worse. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And leave a comment with your current location and local time. I'd love to know who's listening in the dark. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get this story started tonight.